What is up, my friends, and welcome to another episode of the Flashback Podcast. I am your host, Johnnie Arnold, and on this episode, I'll be covering the year in which the love of my life was born, and that is 1980. So stay tuned. In 1980, so many great and iconic movies were released. So, in this episode, I decided to do a top 20. Top 20 movies released in 1980. And starting at number 1 was Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. I know, yes, I am a huge Star Wars fan. It grossed domestically around $209 million. And still today is considered one of the most beloved science fiction franchises ever across the entire globe. Coming in at number 2, 9 to 5. 9 to 5 starred Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, and Dolly Parton. And this movie grossed in around $103 million domestically. Number 3, Stir Crazy. Stir Crazy starred Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. And when they worked together, that was one of my favorite comedic duos ever. Domestically, it grossed around $101 million. So that was pretty good, especially for the 80s. Coming in at number 4, Any Which Way You Can, which starred Clint Eastwood, Sandra Locke, and Jeffrey Lewis. Any Which Way You Can grossed in around $71 million domestically. And at number 5, and this was a big one even when I was a kid, and it came on TV a lot, Private Benjamin. And it starred Goldie Hawn, Aline Brennan, and Armand Assante. Domestically grossing in around $70 million. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the other ones, but the other 15 movie releases, that was the top 5. The other 15, of course, Loretta Lynn just passed away, but at number 6, it was Coal Miner's Daughter. And then we had Smokey and the Bandit, The Blues Brothers, Ordinary People. And then there was Popeye, which was one of my childhood favorite movies. And of course, it starred Robin Williams and Shelley Duvall. Caddyshack, starring some of my favorite comedians, such as Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, Rodney Dangerfield. And then we moved on to Friday the 13th, Raging Bull, Fame, Altered States. Okay, I got to tell y'all something. I loved Altered States. You can't even mention it to Tina. It almost makes her angry because she thought it was so bad, but I loved it. And if you haven't seen it, please watch it. It's really good. Well, it's actually one of those movies that you either love or you hate, and she hates it and I love it. There was Oh God, Book 2, starring the late and great George Burns, Holy Moses, First Family, Somewhere in Time, and the re-release. They re-released it because it was such a good movie. Jaws 2. So there you go. That was a lineup of the top 20 movies of 1980. Now, of course, we cannot talk about 1980 without talking about some of the best-selling albums of 1980. Number 1, AC/DC, Back in Black. Number 2, REO Speedwagon, High Infidelity. Number 3, Barbra Streisand, Guilt. Number 4, Kenny Rogers' Greatest Hits. Number 5, Aerosmith Greatest Hits. Number 6, one of Tina's favorite bands, Journey, and the album was called Escape. Billy Joel, Glass Hotel. Number 8 was Steve Winwood, Arc of a Diver. Number 9, Zodiac, Disco Alliance. I have no idea who they are. Actually, I'm kidding. I have no idea. And number 10, which is very weird, and you would think that this would be over the Disco Alliance album, Bruce Springsteen, The River. So that's your top 10 best-selling music albums of 1980. Now, of course, 1980 had its share of major news stories. And these stories I actually got from thepeoplehistory.com. So if you want to go over there and check out my source material, go ahead. And maybe you can look up your birth year or whatever and see some interesting facts. Of course, I don't think I didn't list every major news story, but I listed the ones that I thought might jog back some memories for some of you. So the very first news article, the U.S. defeats Soviet Union in ice hockey, in which was labeled the Miracle on Ice. And basically what this was the United States actually beat the Soviet Union in an ice hockey match at the Lake Placid Winter Olympics on February 22nd, 1980. And they later called this the Miracle on Ice because the U.S. team was composed of mostly college-level players, and they defeated the 4-time gold medal winning team from the Soviet Union. And this turned out to be one of the most upsetting losses of all sporting history. The game that was played was the semifinal, and it was which determined who would go on to compete for the gold. The Soviet team had not lost a single Olympic hockey game since 1968 and were the heavy favorites, but the Americans amazingly beat them with a score of 4-3 and continued on to the final match, winning against Finland. And of course, this was the second time that the United States had won the gold medal in Olympic hockey. Up next, it was Mount St. Helens eruption on May 18th, 1980 in Washington. And this killed 57 people. It started with small earthquakes near Mount St. Helens in Washington state. And the earthquakes throughout the month increased the volcanic activity. And near the end of the month, the volcano had its first eruption in over 100 years as a series of steam explosions blew a crater into the summit. The volcano remained active through most of April, but then ceased activity for a number of days. And then volcanic activity began again in May. By the middle of May, on May 18th, the pressure had built and Mount St. Helens experienced a huge eruption that created avalanches, explosions, large ash clouds, mudslides, and massive damage to the surrounding area. And unfortunately, a total of 57 people were killed as a result of the volcanic blast. Then we go into the Iran-Iraq War, and that began September of 1980. And this occurred after Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein ordered his forces to invade western Iran. Fighting during the war continued between the two nations until 1988 when they signed a ceasefire. A formal peace agreement to officially end the war was not signed until August 1990. It was estimated that over 1 million people, military members and civilians, lost their lives as a result of the conflict. And a lot of people don't really like this, but CNN began broadcasting on June 1st of 1980 and founded by Ted Turner. It was the very first 24-hour news network available to cable subscribers in the United States and Canada and has since become available worldwide. The network originally struggled to find success, but by the mid-1980s, often being the first to broadcast during big news events. 3M begins sales of its latest product, Post-it notes, invented by Arthur Fry and Spencer Silver. 1980 was also the year that former Beatle John Lennon is shot to death by an obsessed fan by the name of Mark David Chapman outside of Lennon's Manhattan apartment. 1980 was also the year that a severe summer heat wave in the southern U.S. caused 1,117 deaths in 20 states. And this is also the year that a fire destroyed the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas. And last but not least, on the 1980s news stories, the killer clown John Wayne Gacy Jr. was sentenced to death for the murder of 33 boys and young men. And now, my friends, It's time for
20 celebrities born in 1980.
So we're going to start this off, but I'm going to let you know ahead of time. I did not put these in order of month this time. I just listed them off as I found them. October 21st, Kim Kardashian. July 18th, Kristen Bell. August 26th, Macaulay Culkin. December 19th, Jake Gyllenhaal. January 17th, Zooey Deschanel. April 26th, Channing Tatum. March 2nd, Rebel Wilson. December 18th, Christina Aguilera. March 9th, Matthew Gray Gubler. November 12th, Ryan Gosling. April 10th, Charlie Hunnam. February 26th, Chris Pine. February 12th, Christina Ricci. Also on February 12th, Gucci Mane. March 7th, Lauren Prepon. April 30th, and before I begin this, I have to tell you, my wife is going to be super excited that she shares a birth year with Sam Heughan, who is known to play the role of Jamie Fraser on the Starz television series Outlander. October 8th, Nick Cannon. January 28th, Nick Carter. September 9th, Michelle Williams. And July 10th, Jessica Simpson. So this group of video games that I have listed, it's home video games and arcades kind of mixed into one mesh. To start off our list, at number 1 is Pac-Man. Then we're going to go into Missile Command, Rally X, Rogue, Space Invaders 2, Fishing Derby, Dragster, Circus Atari, and Moon Cresta. Now, as we are actually entering the 1980s decade on this show, we're going to start listing more and more popular video game names and franchises that we actually know very, very well, even up to today's standards. So that's going to be very exciting to know where these characters and all these video games actually originated from. After everything we've talked about on this episode, here are some of those flashbacks from my childhood memories. Now, as I have already mentioned, 1980 was a birth year of my favorite little wifey, Tina the Kick-Ass Arnold. And if you don't know, she is also one of the stars on the hit TV show 1,000 Pound Best Friends. I, on the other hand, had turned 2 years old at the beginning of the year. And me being me, I'm sure I gave direct meaning to that wonderful little phrase, the terrible twos. Now, as I mentioned, also, I am a huge Star Wars fan. And of course, this was the year that The Empire Strikes Back was released. After the original and infamous Death Star had been destroyed, and Luke Skywalker is, instructed by the now Force Ghost version of Obi-Wan Kenobi to seek out Yoda to finalize his final Jedi training. This is also the movie in which Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker battle for the first time as Vader overcomes Luke. He also lightsabers Luke's hand, slap off the poor guy's arm, and, causing Luke to drop his damn old lightsaber down the air shaft. And of course, after Luke refuses to turn to the dark side, Vader finally reveals to Luke that he is indeed his father. This is also the Star Wars flick that Luke gets his prosthetic robot hand that he covers with a black glove because, he was a big Michael Jackson fan back then. Now, with all those bad Star Wars jokes aside, I remember being a kid and watching the movie 9 to 5 with my grandparents who were, at the time, huge fans of Dolly Parton. And of course, we just recently lost Loretta Lynn. And this movie I'm about to talk about for a second is of course, one of Tina's favorite movies. And I loved it as a kid, too. I watched it with my grandparents. And that's Coal Miner's Daughter. And Sissy Spacek actually was the star in this movie. And once again, this was yet another movie that I loved watching with my grandparents on television. I was once again too young to see it at the theater, but I did enjoy it on the reruns on the TV And, you know, I really just miss those days, and I just really miss my grandparents. I remember just the house and the smells and just the environment. It's so hard. It's so hard to look back and you just don't have that now. So to top off those 1980 movies was, of course, the very first Friday the 13th movie, which oddly enough is yet again one of Tina's favorite horror movie franchises. And of course, they also later came out with Friday the 13th video game for NES in 1989. And most recently released an online game where you are pretty much thrown into the middle of Camp Crystal Lake, and you are randomly selected as either the killer Jason Voorhees or one of the camp counselors. And basically, you're either running from Jason or you are Jason going after the counselors. Now, even though I was only 2 years old in 1980, I will still never, ever, ever forget seeing the news footage of Mount St. Helens eruption or the shooting of John Lennon. And of course, playing one of the most beloved and iconic video games pretty much ever made, Pac-Man, on my trusty little Atari 2600. Now, to wrap things up, you know, as this podcast progresses and I dig deeper into the 1980s decade and, of course, my childhood memories, I am going to be covering more and more of the similarities and differences between then and now, as, you know, compared in my experiences and my eyes. And, you know, how growing up in the 80s was just plain different. It was just different. Those were the days that the newer generations born from like 1995 and up will never understand, because it predated the internet. It predated social media. It predated cell phones and Wi-Fi. I don't know. It seems to me like those were the days that it felt free to be a kid. Like we had to socialize in person. We didn't get the option of socializing, you know, online on social media, the cell phone, using technology. Those were the days where we actually got exercise, because a lot of us, you know, we were forced to go outside and play, you know, and those were also the days where, you know, our curfew were when the street lights came on, or in my case, because I lived out in the country, it was when the sun went down. I think it's going to be really, really fun and really cool to go back and look at all those wonderful things that really, really changed everything for our future generations. And of course, on the next episode of the Flashback Podcast, I'm going to be moving on to 1981, which was a major year for some major video game franchise titles. So please make sure to come on by and check it out. I am Johnnie Arnold. Peace out.